Pooling finances essentially is helping couples get on the same page when it comes to their money. And so we know from past research in relationship science that when you view things as shared, it increases relationship satisfaction. And so we think this might be one reason why we see couples who pool their finances are more likely to stay together, is because it's sort of a natural way to facilitate these feelings of financial togetherness.
Welcome back to Love and Other Assets. My name is Emily and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plenty. My husband and I co-founded Plenty after we got engaged and were shocked to find what a mess that was to try to manage money together. We'd both been working in Silicon Valley for over a decade, primarily in fintech, so we set out to build something better. Today, Plenty is a wealth platform helping modern couples invest and plan for their future together. We bring the investment strategies and products of the wealthy to the everyday household while making it really easy to understand what you have, where your money is going, and what you're on track for. But we know it's not just about great products and tools. It's also about the conversations when it comes to relationships. So in Honor, Love, and Other Assets podcast, we try to do our best to bring experts into this realm to help lend their voice to helping us navigate conversations about love and money. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm so excited to welcome Emily Garbinsky, an associate professor of marketing and behavioral scientist at Cornell University. She earned a PhD in marketing from Stanford University's Graduate School of Business in 2015 and a BS from Carnegie Mellon in 2010. She joined the Cornell faculty in July 2021, where she teaches marketing and branding management to MBA students. Particularly, I'm super excited because I come across a lot of her research long before we even started Plenty, and her research really focuses on understanding how couples make financial decisions, as well as creating interventions to help consumers make more responsible choices. Dr. Garbinsky has won several prestigious awards for her work and was selected as a 2021 Marketing Science Institute Young Scholar, an honor intended to identify likely leaders of the next generation of marketing academics. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
So I'm so curious. I know we've talked a little bit about this, but you've built an entire career around decision-making around money. What sparked that interest?
Yeah. So I had dabbled with this research stream when I was in graduate school, and I was focusing mainly on how to help individual consumers make more responsible financial choices, with an emphasis on how to help them save money. And the summer after I graduated, so this was June 2015, I went to this conference that I would actually highly recommend. It's called the Boulder Summer Conference on Consumer Financial Decision Making. And what this conference does is it aims to bring together academic researchers across disciplines, as well as practitioners in the consumer financial decision-making space, and sort of provide a forum for both academics and industry practitioners to collaborate, discuss issues, meet, just generally speaking. And when I was at this conference, I met one of my all-time favorite co-authors, Joe Gladstone. We have several papers together at this point, and he sort of pitched this idea of working on this project about how couples who pool their finances spend money differently than couples who keep their finances completely separate. And it became quite evident to me that this was my favorite project. I loved working on it. And so that sort of spawned the next decade of my research, because you, of course, want to work on things that you think are really exciting and that really motivate you. So, yeah, that's how I became interested.
So I remember that paper, but for people listening who haven't come across it, what did you find?
Yeah, so what we find in the paper is that couples who pool their finances in joint accounts feel that they experience a greater need to justify their purchase decisions to their partner. And because of this increased need for justification, we find that people who have finances in joint accounts are more likely to buy what we call utilitarian products, so more responsible products, more functional products, and they're less likely to buy hedonic products or products that are associated with fun or with pleasure. And we test this in several different ways in the paper, but one of my favorite things that we do is we actually obtained data from a large multinational bank. And so we had a year's worth of transaction data that we were able to match to whether this spending came from a joint account that people have with their partner or a separate account that they just have themselves. And so we were able to observe this effect across all different kinds of product categories, that when you spend from a joint account, you're more likely to buy sort of more functional things like groceries, and you're less likely to buy things that are associated maybe with more fun, such as entertainment options or things of that nature.
So what would your thoughts be then, around what we hear from a lot of couples where there's almost like when you enter partnership, they struggle with a little bit of how do we do what's right for the partnership or the family, but also maintain some sense of independence. Do you have a recommendation for couples trying to figure out the right way to navigate that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really hard to give a blanket recommendation that works for all couples because couples are all different. But I think what I find across my research, across various projects, something that bubbles up over and over again is just the importance of financial communication and getting on the same page when it comes to managing your money. So regardless of how you choose to pull your finances, if at all, financial communication and just sort of being on the same page when it comes to your financial goals seems to be the guiding force throughout all of my work.
Yeah, which feels like a perfect segue. I saw a recent headline from you that says how couples answer one question shows whether they communicate well about money. What is that one question?
Yes. So that one question is the degree to which a couple views their financial conflicts as solvable or perpetual. And so to clarify this, this framework that we use in the paper actually comes from another researcher named John Gottman. And I believe one of your previous guests on the podcast, Megan McCoy, also referenced John Gottman's work. So we use some of his work as a basis for this paper. And so what he does is he makes this distinction between problems that are solvable, so problems that have a solution, and problems that are what he refers to as perpetual. So that means that they stem from these fundamental differences in how a couple views something or in certain values that a couple has. And so what we find in this work is that the more a couple perceives their financial conflicts as solvable, the more likely they become to actually talk about money and initiate financial conversations.
So I'm sure it's not, like a switch that flips where a couple just as either, believes that it's perpetual or solvable. Do you have any thoughts on how couples listening in can actually cultivate the positivity around conflict being solvable?
Yes. So we tested one such idea in the paper. And so what we find is that, at least when it comes to financial conflicts, most people tend to view them as perpetual, right? So there's no solution. And this is one reason why we find that couples don't like to talk about money, because quite frankly, they don't see a point in talking about money if there's these fundamental differences between them and their partner and there's no solution. What's the point to having a financial conversation? It's just going to lead to a fight. And so one of the things that we do in the paper is we try to make past instances where a couple reached a financial compromise more salient. And so in the paper, we do this by using a writing task. So we just have a couple member think about what's a recent time where you and your partner were able to reach a compromise when it came to your finances. It can be something little, it can be something big, but tell me about a time where you disagreed about something relating to your money, and what you did to solve it. And what we find is that just sort of sparking people's memory of a past example where they were able to reach a financial solution was able to sort of change how they viewed financial conflicts more generally. And so if you can get people to sort of get out of this mindset that financial conflicts are perpetual and have them realize that, financial problems often do have solutions, that's a really important antecedent that then motivates people to then want to talk about money with their partner.
And let's say we could hop into the mind of someone who is in conflict with their partner talking about money. Do you have any examples of some of the things that might be going through their head that are in the bucket of this is framing it as a perpetual problem versus a solvable problem? I'm so curious just to even see if there's things that people can almost catch themselves on. Be like, oh, actually that was too much of placing it in the perpetual bucket versus in the solvable bucket.
Yes. So I think a good example of this would be just the fact that we tend to sort of think of ourselves as either, I can be a tightwad, I can be a spendthrift. And so these examples of past decisions that our partner made that we're not necessarily comfortable with can be really salient to us. And so an example of a perpetual view would be something like, well, I'm not going to talk to my partner about how I'm unhappy that he's spending so much money on DoorDash because that's what he does. He just spends money. He doesn't think it's important to save. But an example of sort of a more solvable view is, well, when I was really upset that my partner spent all of this money on this particular thing and I approached him about it, he did make changes to how he viewed these things. And so I think we tend to put people in these buckets of, well, saving is more important to me. It's not important to my partner. And we sort of discount the fact that, people can change. And I think Megan McCoy also talked about instances where she views her partner as sort of the same little kid that he used to be, where she recognizes all of these changes and the fact that she's grown as a person. And I think that also sort of can come into play when we think about these differences between solvable and perpetual.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense too. I think one of the things too that came to mind is Meg made a comment about polarization too, where it's probably because you just spend so much darn time seeing the actions of your partner. It probably makes it easier to actually other them and say, oh, you are always a spender or you're always so frugal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think sort of if we want to bring in more psychology, right, we know from prospect theory that bad is stronger than good. So instances where our partner really upset us are naturally going to be more salient than instances where our partner made us really happy. And so I think that's one reason why we decided to use this writing task is to try to bring these happier memories to the forefront and have people sort of hone in on these experiences that they had that were positive instead of negative.
Sounds like that can be a powerful tool, especially before you're preparing for a potential conversation about money.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have other thoughts? I know one thing you think about a lot and talk about a lot is how difficult it can be to even communicate well with your partner about things that are financially stressful. Why do you think it's so difficult? And are there any things that couples can do to make it easier?
Yeah, so there's a few reasons why I think talking about financial stress is so difficult. So from a very general perspective, I think it's difficult for anyone to talk about money because financial conversations are actually considered taboo. So from society at large, right, if you think about discussing money with anyone, we know that people sort of fear being stigmatized if they feel they haven't made good choices with money. if they think they have made good choices with their money. Sometimes people fear that they're going to make others feel bad if they're talking about how much money they have. Even across cultures, talking about money or asking people how much money they make can be considered impolite or inappropriate. And so I think at a societal level, we see this taboo when it comes to talking about money with other people. And I think that this general perception that we shouldn't be talking about money then often bleeds into our financial discussions with our partner. And then we find that when it comes to the couple level specifically, and we think about discussing financial stress with our partner, what I find in my research is that when we think about discussing finances as opposed to any other type of stress in my life, like job stress, parental stress, I actually go into a financial conversation anticipating more conflict than I would if I were to discuss any other sort of stress in my life. And so this is another thing that we find in our paper is that financial stress compared to other common stressors in our lives tend to be more ridden with conflict. And we think that these conversations are more likely to lead to a fight with my partner than other types of conversations. And because people hate fighting with their partner, that's why they avoid them or put them off.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious too what you found where is there anything that, let's say one person starts to notice that they are avoidant or their partner is avoidant. Is there anything that that individual can do to make it a little easier either for themselves or for their partner?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this kind of speaks to the importance of maybe having a regular, recurring financial date night, which is something that I know you and I have talked about in the past. And so, I think this applies to anything more generally. Like if there's something you don't want to do, right? Put it on your calendar, commit to doing it. And so financial conversations definitely fall within this realm of things that most people don't like to do. And so scheduling time to have a financial conversation with your partner becomes even more important. Or tools like Plenty that sort of facilitate transparency. That's why these things are so important, because we know that by default, people don't like to do them.
And do you have any tips for couples who are thinking about starting to have these financial date nights? Any tips to make it more fun or productive?
Yeah, so I don't have any empirical evidence on this, but I can tell you one of the things that I do with my partner. Uh, so, so one of the things that I like to do is I like to start our financial date nights by having both of us bring our most recent credit card statement. And one of the things that we do is we each go through our statement and we highlight some spending that we think we did really well, something we're proud of, something we saved money on. And then we also highlight areas for improvement. So I can tell you for me, one of my biggest issues is that I spend way more money on DoorDash than I should. Among other things. And so I think it sort of helps for both people to begin the conversation by acknowledging things that they've done well and things where they can improve. Because I think that what you want to avoid when it comes to these financial date nights is this attitude that the reason you're having this discussion is because one partner is sort of mad at what the other partner is doing. And I think it helps to set this tone that no one is perfect with money. Like we both can make improvements. If we want to better our financial situation, this is something we both need to contribute to and be willing to do. That's kind of how I like to start. And then we sort of dive into whatever we need to discuss or whatever we set up to discuss for that particular date.
I think one thing that really strikes me about that as an exercise to start is it really actually sets the tone of the entire conversation as you start from a place of openness and a bit of the vulnerability as well. But it's very much from the mindset of how are we going to get better together and how are we going to support each other in being together as a team and individually. So I love that.
Yes. And I really like the transparency aspect, which I think is important too, of like, if you want to take my entire statement and see what I spent money on, feel free. Like, I'm not hiding anything from you. And I think that's another important element.
Speaking of that too, I know one of the other papers that you have written talks about how couples who pool their finances are more likely to stay together. In this day and age now where money is now the number one cause for divorce, that seemed really striking to me as a finding. Why do you think that is the case?
Yes, I think we were also a little surprised to see this finding so robustly across experiments, secondary data sets. Jenny Olson and colleagues now have a paper showing that couples who pool their finances are happier, at least in the first 2 years of marriage, than couples that keep them separate. And so I think that one of the reasons why we see this trend over and over again is because pooling finances essentially is helping couples get on the same page when it comes to their money. And so we know from past research in relationship science that when you view things as shared, it increases relationship satisfaction. And so we think this might be one reason why we see couples who pool their finances are more likely to stay together, is because it's sort of a natural way to facilitate these feelings of financial togetherness.
I know one of the things that we had talked about is really how important that is to have this concept of what's ours. I'm curious, what does pooling finances in your research mean? Does it mean going all in, putting everything to joint accounts? Is it sharing visibility? Is it talking about our money or having some amount of money that is our money? How did you all define that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my work, we've specifically looked at joint versus separate bank accounts. And the reason for that is just because of the data that was available to us in our research. But this could be things like joint investments. Like there's definitely other ways we could have operationalized this. But we specifically focused on joint versus separate bank accounts. And one of the things that we found is that whether or not you have your money in joint or separate accounts actually affects how you talk about it. And so money that's in a separate account, people refer to that as my money. Money that's in a joint account, people refer to it as our money. And so we thought it was interesting that just mere bank account structure actually changes the pronouns that you choose to use when you describe your financial resources.
So with that in mind, would you have any advice for couples navigating this question around should we fully combine all of our finances, keep them fully separate, or do some hybrid structure of some things are joint, some things are individual?
As I said, these are patterns that we observe across thousands of participants. And so I do want us to keep in mind that these are results that we find at the aggregate level. But coming back to this idea of financial communication and getting on the same page, I think if it's really important to couples to keep their finances completely separate, then things like having these recurring financial date nights or just regular communication become really important. And so I really want to hone in on this idea of financial togetherness, because to me, that's what's most important to increase, and not necessarily whether your money is pooled or whether your money is separate. And so we find that having joint accounts is one way to increase feelings of financial togetherness, but there are other ways to achieve that goal if couples don't want to combine their finances. And so at the end of the day, I'm really an advocate for couples doing whatever feels right for them or whatever feels most comfortable. And so if pooling is not for you, just thinking about other ways or other paths to get on the same page, is most important based on my work.
And what we've seen in a lot of the conversations we've had with couples and in the research that we've done at Plenty is especially for couples where the bank account it can feel like a very big step, especially because the first bank account you had was probably one that you have this deep emotional attachment to because you've had it for so many years. What we start to see actually for a lot of the couples is that actually opening up the first place to save together, the first place to have a goal together can also be another way to almost take baby steps towards, let's say for our first trip. Let's say for our first couch. Now let's say for bigger and bigger goals. So couldn't agree more there. You've worked with and seen so many couples over years of their marriage now. I'm curious, based on what you've seen there, do you think it's important for both people in a partnership to stay involved in managing their money? Or is a divide and conquer more effective? What have you seen? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think it kind of depends on how we define involved. And so John Lynch and Adrian Ward actually have this amazing paper that's one of my favorite papers in the space. And it shows that the person who manages the household finances is not necessarily the person with the highest level of financial literacy. Instead, what they find is that this person who manages the household money is just the person who has the most time to do it. And so I think if we want to think about like a household CFO versus a household COO, if these responsibilities are split, then just like in any C-suite in America, regular communication becomes really important. But if the CFO and the COO are the same person, then it's really important for this person to provide the other partner with a general overview of their financial portfolio and just how much money is reasonable for that person to spend. And so this sort of reminds me of a story that's always in the back of my mind when I think about couples and communication and how to manage their finances. So this was about 10 years ago when I was on faculty at the University of Notre Dame. And I decided to collect data at a local bridal fair. Do you know what that is? I didn't know what it was at the time. I think these are really common in the Midwest. So bridal fairs are these events where any vendors related to weddings can come and set up booths to display the products that they have. So you go and they have like wedding dresses, flowers, place settings, anything you would need for a wedding. And future brides can go and see them and decide, what they want to use for their wedding. And so I thought this would be a great place to collect data because this is a place where, engaged couples are coming. And I wanted to survey them to see how they planned to manage their money once they got married. So I came, I had, a few research assistants with me. And one of the questions that I asked in my survey was what I thought was a very basic question was, how much money does your fiance make? And I remember this woman came up to me and she said, I have no idea. She said, I have no idea how to answer this question. And she said, I just know that my fiance makes enough money so that when we get married, I don't have to work. And to me, it was just crazy that like this woman is going to be quitting her job and she has no idea how much money her future husband is bringing to the table. And, I kind of said to her, well, what's your budget for the wedding? And it became quite clear she didn't have one. And, I know on a previous podcast, you talked about the importance of wedding planning and how expensive weddings can be. And, having a budget for these things is really important. And so if one person is taking care of all of the financial decisions, it is important to give this other person an idea of where you stand with their money so that they don't accidentally overspend on things that you can't afford.
Yeah. That is an incredible story. I think one of the things that we think a lot about too is, and we hear this actually with a lot of couples that we talk to, where there's almost like many layers of breakdown in communication there. But when we typically talk to the person who is used to managing a lot of the money, and if their partner is not interested at all in talking and engaging about finances, it's this duality that's been fascinating to me because they feel a lot of pressure around, I'm alone and trying to figure this out. What
Mm-hmm.
if I make a mistake? It's all on me. I can't talk to my partner about it. And it's actually can increase the stress of a relationship. And on the other side, the partner can feel a lot of uncertainty because it's both I feel like I don't know enough. I'm unsure about how to even ask the right questions. I don't want to look stupid. But what we saw was in a UBS study, when both partners do talk about their money, the stats there were almost like over 90% of couples felt more secure about their futures. They felt less stressed. They felt they were less likely to make big mistakes. And so there's all these benefits, but it's also very much leaning into the discomfort and not the easy path for sure.
Yeah, that's also something that I find kind of fascinating about this as well is all of the stats on the benefits of financial communication, yet we're so hesitant to do it. And so how do we, break down these barriers and think about ways to facilitate it is something that's really important. But I find that relationship fascinating that we know that there's not only positive financial outcomes, but relationship outcomes when we talk about money, but yet no one wants to be the first one to initiate these conversations.
Yeah, the message that for me was loud and clear too, because even when we started talking about finances in our own partnership, it was so uncomfortable the first time.
Mhm,
And it got
mhm.
easier. But the first few conversations was definitely I've never needed to have this conversation before. I've always been so independent. And now I feel like I'm showing my guts to someone and I care about what they think. Which is almost the harder part. Is like, I can't even be like, and it doesn't matter. No, it does matter. But they have their own opinions. So, for
Yeah,
sure.
completely agree.
So, I'm curious, as you're thinking about what you're most excited to continue researching, what are some things that you're excited to continue digging into?
Oh my gosh, there are so many things. One of the things that I think is sort of uh, up next on my project plate is I'm starting to think about, all different kinds of couples. And one type of couple that I've become really interested in are couples where are heterosexual couples where the woman actually out earns the man. And so, we're seeing trends where women are making more than their male counterparts. And so I've started to think about, does this matter for how couples choose to manage their money? On one level, I don't think it should, but on another level, it would be kind of interesting if it did. And so one of the things that I've been digging into with my PhD student, Lena Kim, as well as Alicia Johnson, who's an assistant professor at UMass Amherst, is how couples choose to split their shared expenses and whether or not this varies depending on the gender of the higher earner. And so one of the things that we're finding is that when the higher earner is a woman, couples are more likely to split their shared expenses equally. So they're more likely to go 50-50 on things like rent, utilities, groceries, vacations. But when the higher earner is a man, couples are more likely to split their shared expenses proportionally to income. And so they're more comfortable with the man paying for more if he makes more. But they're not so comfortable with this idea of the woman paying for more if she makes more. And so we're trying to figure out, I won't say too much more about it because it's not published work. And so we're still trying to dig into some of the mechanisms, but, this is something that I think is really interesting, and trying to figure out why this is, when it occurs, when it doesn't occur. But yeah, so many unanswered questions. It's a very promising avenue for future work.
That sounds really exciting. Definitely some of those anecdotes overlap and align with what we've heard from couples, personal experience as well. I'd also be really curious to know if there's a difference for if the couple has kids yet or not have
Hmm.
kids yet, or who makes more of the investment decisions versus not. But that sounds really interesting for what you're exploring right now. To wrap up our podcast episode, Dr. Garbinsky, thank you so much for making time for being able to join us. I have a few lightning round questions, if that sounds great to you.
Yeah, let's do it.
First one, what's a book that you read recently that was unexpectedly delightful?
Ooh, so I think this counts. I went to Vienna on vacation and I read Rick Steves' travel book on Vienna and Salzburg, and I didn't know how fascinating Vienna was, and I ended up reading pretty much the entire book cover to cover.
That's incredible. Favorite date night with your partner?
Oh, hands down, dinner and a movie. We're actually going on a date tonight to go to the drive-in. So yeah, huge movie fan here. We're going to see Twisters.
That will be incredible. Drive-in theaters, absolute favorite. Love that you guys have one nearby. Final thing here. What is a bucket list item you and your partner are excited about?
Bucket list. Oh, okay. So maybe I shouldn't be sharing this, but whatever. So we actually decided to check out Legoland. There's one in New York. We don't have kids. I don't know if we're allowed to go without kids. But we drove past it when we were on our way to the airport, and I was kind of like, that looks like an interesting amusement park. And so, yeah, we're gonna go to Legoland in a few weeks, and that's been on our bucket list for a while. Yeah.
We may be relationship kindred spirits, and that way we have not entirely jokingly said that we should borrow our cousins' kids and bring them to Legoland, so we have a reason to go to Legoland.
Yeah, I want to see it. And I'm a huge fan of amusement parks. I am from Pittsburgh, so I grew up with Kennywood. Have been to Cedar Point. Yeah, I don't think Legoland's going to have the roller coasters of Cedar Point, but I just, generally speaking, I like the summertime vibes of amusement parks, and I think it'll be sort of a nice, relaxing day before my class starts in a few weeks. So, yeah.
Well, I'm excited to hear about it and hopefully see a picture.
Yes, I will send one to you.
Dr. Garbinsky, thank you so much for joining us on Love and Other Assets today and bringing all of your research to other couples who are going to be able to think more about how they communicate and ways that they can strengthen their relationship. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.